It was one of those quiet mornings when the sun hadn't yet decided whether to shine or hide behind the clouds. The air was still cool, and the streets were mostly empty, except for the slow, steady footsteps of a man who had walked this same path for nearly 20 years. His name was Elijah Brown, 72 years old. A retired mail carrier who still woke up before dawn, not because he had to, but because his heart didn't know how to rest. Routine kept him alive. It reminded him he was still part of the world. He always said good morning to the paperboy, nodded to the bus driver, and smiled at the same grocery store clerk who'd known him since she was 16. Everyone in town knew Elijah. Some folks called him Mr. B. Others just waved and smiled when they saw him coming. He carried a softness that made people feel safe. But that morning, something felt different. As he pushed open the door to the grocery store, the bell above the entrance gave a little chime, and the faint smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. He grabbed a small cart, humming an old blues tune his daddy taught him. Nothing about that morning warned him that trouble was waiting just around the corner, standing in aisle 3, gripping a cart like it was a weapon. Her name was Katrin Wallace, mid-40s, a sharp voice, sharp eyes, and even sharper opinions about who belonged where. She wasn't from this town, but she acted like she owned it. The kind of person who never smiles back when you greet her. The kind who makes silence feel dangerous. Mr. Brown turned into the aisle, cart rolling slow, his eyes scanning the shelves for his usual oatmeal. Katrin was there, parked in the middle of the aisle, blocking both sides. He waited politely for a moment, then spoke in that soft voice of his. "Excuse me, ma'am. Mind if I slip past?" Her head turned slow. Her lips curled, like the words offended her. "You people always in a rush, huh?" she muttered. At first, Elijah thought he heard her wrong. Maybe she meant nothing by it. So he smiled, because that's what he'd been taught all his life. To stay calm, to keep the peace. "No rush, ma'am. Just trying to get by." She didn't move, just stared. Her eyes heavy with something colder than anger, something old, bitter, practiced. He tried again, still gentle. "If you don't mind, I'll just squeeze through right here." And that's when she said it. Words sharp enough to cut through the quiet hum of the store. "You people always think you can go wherever you want." "This ain't your store!" The air froze. The humming stopped. A young couple at the end of the aisle looked up from their cart. The cashier near the register paused mid-scan. You could almost hear hearts stop beating for a moment. Elijah's hand trembled on the cart handle. He'd lived long enough to know when to walk away, but he also knew that silence could feel like surrender. He took a breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, I shop here every week. Ain't trying to cause trouble." Katrin's voice rose, shrill now. "Trouble. You people are the trouble. Always playing the victim, always expecting special treatment." And just like that, the peace in that grocery store shattered. She started ranting louder, her words echoing down the aisles. Some shoppers tried to calm her down. One young woman pulled out her phone, recording. Elijah stood there, stunned, heart heavy, not just from her words, but from how familiar they felt. He'd heard them before, 50 years ago, in uniform, delivering letters to houses that never smiled at him. He whispered under his breath, "Lord, not again." Before I go further, let me take a moment to welcome you all. This is Simmons, and you're listening to Chronicles of Black, where we tell real stories. Stories that hurt, stories that heal, and stories that remind us why justice still matters. If this story moves you, make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Because silence never changed the world, but your voice just might. Back in that grocery store, Elijah could feel the weight of years pressing on his chest. He wasn't angry yet, just tired. Tired of pretending that age or kindness could shield him from hate. He could have shouted, could have walked out, but he stayed still, like a tree refusing to bend in the storm. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you don't know me, but I promise you, I mean no harm to nobody." Her laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "Of course you don't. None of you ever do, right? Till something happens." Someone called out, "Ma'am, that's enough!" But Katrin didn't stop. She pushed her cart hard, bumping his leg. His knee buckled and he stumbled back, gripping the shelf for balance. Pain flashed across his face, but he didn't raise a hand. He just stared at her, eyes full of disbelief and quiet sorrow. That's when the store manager came rushing over, voice trembling. "Miss, you need to leave, right now." She tried to argue, but the crowd was turning. Phones recording, faces angry. And Elijah, he just stood there trying to catch his breath, his heart breaking not from the bruise forming on his leg, but from the memory it carried. A memory of every time someone like him had been told to stay in his place. He whispered, "I thought maybe this world had changed, but that morning proved it hadn't changed enough." As she was escorted out, her voice echoed through the automatic doors, loud and bitter, still spitting venom. And Mr. Brown, standing in the aisle surrounded by quiet eyes and humming fluorescent lights, felt something shift deep inside him. Because sometimes it only takes one moment to show the whole world what still needs to be fixed. The store doors slammed shut behind her, but her voice still echoed in everyone's ears. The room stayed silent for a few long seconds, the kind of silence that feels alive. Trembling, Elijah stood there, breathing slow, holding the cart like it was keeping him upright. His leg hurt, but that wasn't what made him tremble. It was humiliation, the kind that burns long after the bruises fade. A young woman walked up, the same one who'd been recording. She whispered, "Sir, are you okay?" He nodded faintly. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Don't worry about me." But she didn't move. She kept her phone steady, camera still rolling, because she knew, deep down, this story wasn't over yet. Through the wide front windows, they could see Katrin pacing outside, still shouting. Her voice carried across the parking lot. "He hit me! That old man hit me!" she yelled, lying without a blink. Shoppers began to gather near the door, torn between disbelief and anger. The manager whispered, "She's calling the cops." And that one sentence changed the air again. Elijah's shoulders tensed. He'd been through enough to know what could happen when the wrong person made the wrong call. He'd seen too many stories end badly. A lie could travel faster than the truth, and sometimes it reached the badge first. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispering a small prayer under his breath. "Lord, just let me get home today." A few minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the still morning. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. The crowd inside watched from the windows as Katrin ran toward them, dramatic, shaking, pointing toward the store. "That man attacked me! He pushed me! He's dangerous!" Inside, the young cashier whispered, "This is crazy. I saw everything." Another man nodded. "Yeah, we all did." "She's lying." When the officers entered, Elijah stood still, hands visible, calm but heavy with history. He'd seen that look before, suspicion first, questions later. One officer spoke firmly. "Sir, we got a call about an altercation. Can you tell us what happened?" Before Elijah could speak, the young woman with the phone stepped forward. "I have the whole thing on video." He didn't touch her. "She hit him with her cart." The officer glanced at the screen, jaw tightening as the truth played out in front of them. Katrin's shouting, the shove, Elijah's restraint. The room exhaled in relief as one of the officers stepped outside toward her. Outside, Katrin's confidence started to crumble. Her face twisted in disbelief as they told her the witness's version. "You're arresting me? Me?" she yelled, as if her skin alone should have made her immune. Inside, Elijah stayed quiet, hands still on the cart. He didn't want to see it. He didn't want to gloat. He just wanted peace. When one officer came back in, he said softly, "Sir, we're going to file a report. Do you need medical attention?" Elijah shook his head. "No, son. Just tired, that's all." The young woman turned her phone off and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." He gave a small smile. "It's all right, baby." Not the first time somebody tried to make me feel small. "But you see, I'm still standing." He turned slowly, heading toward the door, limping just a little. The crowd made space for him. Nobody said a word, but their eyes said everything. Shame, respect, realization. Outside, he passed by Katrin as she was being placed in the police car. Their eyes met for just a second. She didn't yell this time, didn't spit any words, Just stared, face pale, hands cuffed. Elijah didn't hate her. He couldn't. Hate was heavy, and he'd carried enough of that from other people to ever carry it himself. He just whispered, "You need to do better." She turned her head away. The officers drove off, lights flashing red against the store's glass doors. The whole town would know by sunset. But the real wound wasn't what happened in that aisle. It was what it reminded everyone of, that even after decades of progress, one lie, one burst of hate, could still threaten to erase a man's dignity in seconds. Later that evening, the video hit social media. The caption read, "Elderly black man attacked by racist woman, then accused of assault." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Hashtags appeared. Strangers demanded justice. Others defended her, refusing to believe what they'd seen with their own eyes. But the truth had already taken root. Elijah sat in his living room that night, his old hands folded in his lap, the glow of the TV reflecting in his eyes. He saw his own face on the screen, calm, quiet, shaking a little. He whispered, "I didn't ask for this. I just wanted my oatmeal." But sometimes history doesn't ask for your permission to repeat itself. It just does. He thought about his father, who'd told him stories of walking to work through crowds that cursed his name. He thought about his mother, who used to say, "Dignity, son, is doing right even when the world don't." And that night, those words came back to him, stronger than ever. The world was watching now, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't just going to look away. By the next morning, the whole town was talking. The video of the grocery store incident had spread faster than wildfire on a dry day. Every corner of social media had picked it up. Some watched it in anger, some in disbelief, and some quietly ashamed that something like this could still happen right where they lived. Elijah Brown didn't own a smartphone. He didn't even have Wi-Fi, but he didn't need any of that to know what was happening. His neighbor's knock on the door told him everything. "Mr. Brown," she said softly, "you're all over the news." He chuckled dryly. "Well, ain't that something? 72 years and I finally made the headlines." She showed him the clip on her phone. His face on that little screen looked older than he felt. Tired eyes, trembling hands, but a strength that refused to break. The comment section below was overflowing. Thousands of people standing up for him. Strangers calling him brave. Others calling for Katrin's arrest. Justice was finding its way into the light. And it was loud. The grocery store released a public statement that afternoon, apologizing to Elijah and banning Katrin from all their locations nationwide. The manager who had stepped in during the altercation came to Elijah's porch the next day, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Mr. Brown," she said, voice shaky, "I'm sorry we didn't stop her sooner." He smiled kindly. "You did what you could, sweetheart. The world don't change in one morning, but every time somebody stands up, it moves an inch." Reporters started showing up on his street, knocking on doors, asking for interviews. Elijah didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. But something inside him said this was bigger than him now, bigger than a bruise on his leg, bigger than a grocery aisle. So he agreed to speak. They set up cameras in his small living room. His old armchair, the one with the torn fabric on the side, sat in the background. The reporter leaned forward and asked gently, "Mr. Brown, how did it feel in that moment?" He paused, thinking. It felt familiar, like I was back in 1964, standing at a counter that didn't want me there. Like all the years in between didn't change a thing. The reporter nodded, eyes soft. "And what do you hope comes out of this?" He smiled faintly. "Accountability. Not revenge, not hate. Just truth. Maybe if people see this, they'll think before they speak. Maybe they'll see what words can do to a man's spirit." That clip of him speaking, just that one line, started spreading even faster than the original video. Folks started calling him Mr. Brown, the man who stood tall. Celebrities retweeted his words. Community leaders quoted him. Churches played his interview during Sunday service. The story had stopped being about just one woman's hate. It had become about a man's quiet strength. But justice was still unfinished. A few days later, the police announced formal charges against Katrine Wallace. The shove she'd given Elijah was classified as assault, aggravated by bias. The same officer who'd taken her away that morning reached out to Elijah personally. "Sir," he said over the phone, "the DA's pressing charges. You'll probably be asked to testify." Elijah sighed softly. "I'll be there. I just hope she understands why this matters." When he hung up, he sat back in his chair, looking at the wall where an old black-and-white photograph hung. It was him, 20 years younger, wearing his postal uniform, standing beside his wife, May. She'd passed 5 years ago, but he still talked to her sometimes. "Well, baby," he whispered, looking at the photo. "Looks like your stubborn old man's about to make some noise." Outside his window, kids were playing in the street, laughing. One of them spotted him and waved. "Hi, Mr. Brown." He waved back with a smile. For the first time in days, he felt light. Like maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. Later that week, a community gathering was held outside the grocery store. Dozens of people showed up holding candles, singing softly. Signs that read, "Justice for Elijah," glowed under the streetlights. He didn't want to go at first, but the cashier, Tina, the same young woman who'd filmed the whole thing, came to his porch and said, "Sir, people want to see you. They want to thank you." So he went. When he arrived, the crowd went silent. He stood on the small wooden steps outside the store, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't come here to be no hero," he said. "I came here to buy groceries. But the Lord works funny sometimes. Maybe he wanted folks to see what still hides in the corners. Maybe he wanted to remind us that respect ain't a color thing. It's a human thing." The crowd applauded. Some cried. Others just bowed their heads. He ended with a line that would stay with people long after the candles burned out. "You can fine a person. You can arrest them. But you can't legislate hard. That's something each of us gotta fix on our own." That clip, too, spread everywhere. By then, even the district attorney's office had seen enough. The case moved quickly. The town that had once stayed silent now stood behind him. Justice wasn't coming fast, but for once it was coming. And for Elijah Brown, that was enough to keep believing that the world, even when slow, could still learn to do right. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, that strange mix of routine and history. For most people, it was just another Monday. But for Elijah Brown, it felt like a lifetime folding into one single day. He'd never been in a courtroom before, not as a defendant, not as a witness. He'd spent most of his life avoiding trouble. But now, here he was, 72 years old, walking slow with his cane, wearing his best brown jacket and that quiet dignity that couldn't be borrowed or bought. The benches were filled. Reporters, townsfolk, even strangers who'd seen his story online. Some came to support, some just to see. And in the front row, Katrin Wallace sat with her lawyer, eyes fixed on the floor, her hair pulled back too tight, face pale as chalk. Gone was the smirk, gone was the confidence. She looked smaller now, like the weight of the world had finally pressed down on her shoulders. Elijah didn't look at her long. He didn't need to. He'd already seen who she really was that day in the store. Now this was about truth. Not vengeance, not ego, truth. The judge entered and the room stood. A quiet rustle of shoes on polished floor. Then, the proceedings began. The prosecutor played the footage for the court, the same video that had been seen millions of times across the internet. The audio filled the courtroom, Katrin's voice, loud, hateful, echoing through the speakers. The moment she rammed the cart into Elijah, the way he didn't fight back. Just stood there, holding the cart, steady, silent. The room went still. You could hear people shifting, uncomfortable. Some faces turned red. Others lowered their heads. Elijah watched it without flinching. He didn't want to relive it, but he needed to see it one last time. To remind himself that his calm that day wasn't weakness. It was strength. When the video ended, the prosecutor spoke softly. "Your Honor, this isn't just about a shove in a grocery store. This is about respect. It's about what happens when hate thinks it can get away with anything." The defense tried their best. Katrin's lawyer stood saying she'd been under stress, that she'd lost her job, that she wasn't a bad person, just emotional. He even said, "There's no proof this was racially motivated." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Counselor, we've all heard the tape." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. He could feel his late wife beside him in spirit, like she was sitting right there whispering, "Hold your head high, Eli." Then it was his turn to take the stand. The bailiff swore him in. He sat down, hands folded, eyes calm. "Mr. Brown," the prosecutor said, "can you tell the court what happened that morning?" He took a slow breath. "I was just doing what I always do, shopping, minding my own business. I asked her polite if I could pass. She didn't like that. Next thing I know, I'm being called everything but my name." He paused, voice trembling slightly. "You spend your life trying to do right by folks. You serve your community, raise your kids, pay your taxes, help your neighbors, but one person can still look at you and see nothing but color. After 72 years, that hurts." The courtroom stayed silent. You could almost feel people holding their breath. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination, trying to poke holes, trying to twist words, but Elijah stayed calm. Every answer was simple, steady, true. He didn't let anger take the microphone. He let truth do the talking. When he stepped down from the stand, the crowd gave a small, quiet applause, not loud enough to break court rules, but loud enough to be felt. Katrine was called next. She walked slowly to the stand, face tight. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt him, I just lost my temper." The prosecutor asked, "You called him a racial slur. You told him he didn't belong. Is that what losing your temper sounds like, or is that what you believe?" Her eyes darted around the room. I was angry. I'm sorry." The judge leaned forward. "You attacked a 72-year-old man for existing in the same aisle as you. That's not anger, Ms. Wallace. That's hate." The gavel hit the desk, sharp and final. "Ms. Wallace," the judge said, "you are found guilty of misdemeanor assault with hate motivation. You are sentenced to 6 months of community service, mandatory racial sensitivity training, and a fine of $25,000 payable to the victim. Furthermore, this court expects you to learn the value of humility and respect, lessons you should have known long before today." The room exhaled. Justice had spoken, not perfect, but real. Katrin looked down, tears sliding down her face. Elijah just sat quietly, his hands resting on his cane. No smile, no smirk, just stillness. Justice wasn't about celebration. It was about closure. As he left the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones reached toward him, reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Brown, how do you feel? Do you forgive her?" He stopped for a moment at the steps, looked straight ahead and said, "Forgiveness don't mean forgetting. It just means I won't let her hate live rent-free in my heart." Then he walked, down those steps slow, steady, like a man who'd been carrying a burden for too long and had finally set it down. For the first time in days, the air outside felt lighter. The sun was out, warm on his skin. He took a breath that felt like freedom. Justice had come. Quietly, but firmly. A week after the court hearing, life in that small town began to quiet down again. The cameras left. The reporters moved on to the next story. But for Elijah Brown, life didn't just return to normal. It found a new kind of peace. Every morning, he still walked that same road to the grocery store, his steps slow but steady, the cane tapping gently against the sidewalk. The folks who used to just nod at him now stopped to shake his hand. Some hugged him. Others just looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you for standing tall, Mr. Brown," and he'd smile that same warm smile and answer, "Wasn't much standing, just didn't fall." The grocery store had changed, too. They'd put up a new sign right near the entrance that read, "Respect is required here." It wasn't fancy, but it meant something. It was a small promise that what happened that morning would never happen again inside those walls. Tina, the young cashier, spotted him one afternoon and ran over, handing him a free bag of groceries. "You don't owe me that," he said. She smiled. "I know, but I owe you. We all do." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You just keep being kind, sweetheart. That's payment enough." He walked down the same aisle where everything had happened. Aisle 3. It felt different now. Cleaner. Lighter somehow. Maybe it was just his heart that had changed. Maybe the world really was trying to do better, inch by inch. A mother shopping with her son whispered, "That's him." The little boy ran up shyly and asked, "Mister, are you the man who was brave?" Elijah crouched a bit, smiling. "Son, brave ain't loud. Brave is just not letting the world make you small." The boy nodded, eyes wide, like he'd just heard something holy. Later that evening, Elijah sat on his porch, watching the sun melt into orange and gold. The neighborhood was calm. Kids were laughing somewhere down the block. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like the world had shifted, not by miles but by inches. Enough to matter. He turned on the small radio beside him, and there it was again. His own voice from the interview replaying on a local station. The host said, "Elijah Brown reminds us that dignity is not silence. It's strength in the face of hate." He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd be famous for minding my business." But maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes the loudest revolutions start with the quietest people. As the night deepened, the stars came out one by one, and the air turned cool. Elijah closed his eyes and whispered, "May, you'd be proud of me." In that stillness, it felt like she was right there, smiling back at him. He thought about Katrin. He didn't hate her. He pitied her. He hoped that somewhere in those hours of community service, she'd meet someone who'd make her see what her words had done. Maybe she'd see that hate doesn't make you strong. It just makes you empty. He leaned back in his chair, whispering, "You learn peace when you stop needing payback." And that was how his story ended. Not with noise, not with bitterness, but with grace. Before we end this story, let me speak to you, the listener, directly. This is Simmons, and you're listening to Chronicles of Black, where we tell the stories others try to forget. Stories of pain, pride, and persistence. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, don't let it fade. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because silence protects no one. But truth can change everything. Remember Elijah Brown, the man who stood in a grocery store, faced hate head-on, and never let it steal his peace. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just stood tall, and sometimes that's all the world needs to see to start changing.